thesis. My fear is that this is going to help the president get elected. That the majority of the voting public will see this as basically about sex, and that this will be further play into the whole narrative of the deep state is coming after me.
I think it's going to take a few weeks to a month to understand that. But I actually am less pessimistic about it than you are.
Jess, where did this podcast find you?
I'm at home in New York City in the middle of my maternity leave, so I'm thrilled to talk to an adult about something.
Maternity leave?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. How long is that?
I am entitled to 16 weeks paid maternity leave.
Good for you.
Yeah.
That's a whole
Which
other
everyone should
talk
be.
show.
Yes, it is. I would love to do a childcare conversation for sure. But
by the way, does your husband get paternity leave?
he does. They don't have a formal policy. It's just kind of like a take what you need situation. And I still, because he works in finance, I still think that they are a little uneasy with taking a lot of time. But people seem to be splitting it up. Like they take a bit at the beginning, and then when they really want to be off, like in August, they're like, oh, I'm on paternity leave. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Did you take time with yours?
So just so you know, so I've always had my own businesses, but that take as much as you need is a trick. I used to do the same thing. I used to tell people would say, what's your vacation policy? And I'm like, you need a vacation, take a vacation. And people in a high achiever firm all feel this implicit pressure to take no time. So I found it was the perfect model to make sure that no one took any time. How's that for being a terrible boss?
I mean, it's honestly how you keep up. But again, it's a whole other story. But I think we've talked about it. When I lived in London, I did an internship for someone who was doing a maternity cover, which can be up to a year over there. And then the woman came back. They didn't want to get rid of the guy who had subbed in and had done such a fantastic job. And in the end, the woman ended up getting pushed out a couple years later because there really wasn't a role for her left, but they legally couldn't let her not come back after a year off, and it turned into this whole mess of a thing. So they're big politics with it, to say the least.
Kids ruin everything. All right, let's get to the serious stuff here. So 34 felony counts. What do you make of this historic verdict?
Well, it seems like it was the correct verdict, and everyone has really been parsing the difference between what the jury did and whether this was politically motivated or if this was the right thing to bring the case. It seems like the jury did a fantastic job. They evaluated the evidence. They made a timely decision. I was following really closely, at least on social media, all the questions that they were asking. All of the legal commentators kept saying, those are the right questions to be asking, paid great attention, etc. And Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's lawyer, went and did a bunch of interviews, and he said, we expected that this could happen. We made all of our decisions together about how to present our case. We obviously approved the jurors and the alternates, and this is the way that it goes sometimes. We'll see how the appeal process goes. The other side of the coin, which is, should Alvin Bragg have brought this case? And I was listening to your latest episode of Pivot before we got on, so I know that you had Ellie Honig on, who obviously has a bit of a counter opinion to a lot of Democrats who are seething about even mentioning the fact that this was a case that perhaps should not have been brought, and that bringing it up to a federal charge with the campaign finance fraud essentially was not the right way to go, is the other side of the coin. And that's where I think the really interesting stuff is.
Well, let's put forward that thesis. My fear is that this is going to help the president get elected. That the majority of the voting public will see this as basically about sex, and that if they figured out a way to elevate an attempt to cover up sex or hush money to a felony, that they're going to need more courts, that there are a lot of people who pay off mistresses or end up doing things that are illegal under the context of trying to keep affairs discreet or quiet, and that this is selective prosecution, and that this will be further play into the whole narrative of the deep state is coming after me, rally his base. My understanding is he raised a record amount of money, or a lot of money, post the verdict. Distinct of the merits of when you bring a case or don't, just strategically, if you don't want Trump to be president, do you think this helps or hurts us?
I think it's going to take a few weeks to a month to understand that. And the polling is really fuzzy at this moment. And some people are just ingesting the information. Some people haven't even paid attention to it yet. And the Biden campaign is still figuring out how they want to approach this. Like, how often do you want to call him Donald Trump? And how often do you want to call him convicted felon Donald Trump? And that's something that the communications people are struggling with as we speak. But I actually am less pessimistic about it than you are. And the reason for that is that I only care about a small subset of voters. The bases of the parties don't matter to me at this point. And I know that Biden's polling has been soft or softer with African Americans and Latino voters and some young voters, but that happened in 2020 as well. And people came home. So I'm putting that to the side now and thinking, okay, who is my focus? Moderate Republicans and independent voters. And there have been a few surveys taken since the verdict, and we'll get more and more, but ABC Ipsos was out there in the field, and they got that 52% of independents say that he should withdraw from the race and 16% of Republicans. 16% might seem like a low number, but there's your swung election, right? Those are your swing states, potentially. Morning Consult got basically a mirror image of that result. CBS also something similar. So if you think about how many people are actually up for grabs, how few we have to persuade that this matters and that this isn't just a one-off, that he lied about this, but that he is a chronic liar. And that has been a thread through the E. Jean Carroll case, the civil fraud case, and if we ever get to the marquee cases, which obviously I would have preferred if we were talking about the nuclear secrets that are hanging out in the toilet at Mar-a-Lago or January 6th before we were talking about the hush money case. I think that you can persuade a lot of people with that to just say, you know what, maybe I was thinking about giving him another shot, but the guy is such an effing liar.
You work with, I mean, you work at or you work with a conservative network, or what is the vibe when you talk to people off camera? Do they generally believe this is another example of the deep state going after, as a function of Trump derangement syndrome, or this is bad for us? What's the vibe off mic or off camera among conservatives?
I think that they actually feel both of those things, and that we're always trying to put people into one box, and it's actually a lot more complex than that. So, yes, the deep state is real, and they'll go back and try to relitigate, quote, Russiagate with me, and then I'll get all hot and bothered again about Hillary Clinton, and they'll be like, actually, I don't want to talk to you about this anymore. And then they also understand the fact that this does not help their case. And you can tell that Republicans know that it's a bad thing from the type of panic in the way that they're speaking about him being a convicted felon. They want to raise a ton of money, which they did. I mean, we'll see what the actual figures are, but they're reporting $141 million, which is astronomical. They will not say what it will be used for, which I'm always paying attention to. So, okay, you've got all this money now. Are you going to open a field office? And then they're like, actually, maybe we'll just pay Donald Trump's legal fees. So that's where the Democrats still have a huge advantage. But they know that this isn't helpful. No one ever wants to be indicted. No one ever wants to be convicted. And something that I don't think folks are paying as much attention to as they should be, every day that Donald Trump is out there just grievances, wall to wall, I'm a political prisoner, whatever else he's talking about. He's not talking about the issues. And the issues are the ones that are going to sway that little group of people that we were talking about, the independents and the Republicans, who have decided either he is this guy and we don't care, or he is this guy and I'd like to hear something, a plan for the economy, a plan for the border. So I think that does lead to an advantage for the Democrats and disappointment for my wonderful colleagues who I look forward to rejoining in Milwaukee in July, which is a crazy first week back.
That's going to be really interesting, the convention, right? That's
It's
going to
going to be,
be.
I'm actually a little scared. I live right by the courthouse in Manhattan, and it was remarkably low key. I saw a few kind of, and I wouldn't call them like parades, but a bunch of Trump cars that had Blue Lives Matter flags and now the upside down American flag because Samuel Alito is some sort of hero for, quote, not standing up to his wife who did that all by herself or whatever. But when Trump was coming in and out, they drive with him. But going to the convention 4 days after the sentencing, I think it could get a little wild. I'm not saying January 6th levels, but, you have to be ready for anything to happen, especially if he's given jail time.
But so it's just some anecdotal evidence, and I'm curious if you picked up on the same thing. I find one of the most encouraging things, or a signal, and granted, I'm looking for signals that this is going to help get Biden reelected. But when I was living in Florida in Delray Beach, and right after the election, there was a parade for a Stop the Steal parade. And Delray is actually kind of purplish slash blue, but you go 3 miles inland and it's deep red. I could not get over the number of people and the passion around the Stop the Steal. And they had a desk set up, information, and, just for fun, I walked over and had them explain. And these were people who were deeply committed and believed that the election had been stolen. I thought, I'm just so out of touch with America. And the passion they felt, the number of people. When the verdict came down, I was encouraged at how what I'll call little agita, grievance, or rage among the general populace was. I see it as there's rage fatigue, that people are starting to think, you know what, I'm still going to vote for him, but I'm not going to storm the Capitol. Do you sense the same thing?
I mean, that's the hope, but we're also far out from the election. I think the vibe in October is going to be a lot more heightened on both sides of this. I was surprised that there weren't more lefties showing up at the courthouse to troll him, right? Or standing outside of Trump Tower and the new Tiffany's, which is gorgeous, and trying to do it that way. So I think that we're just a bit too far out for it. But I think it will be less because people probably have learned a lesson or two from the number of January 6ers who have gotten pretty serious sentences, and the number of people who have been very forthcoming with their transition out of being a Trump supporter and talking about how they were manipulated, how they were brainwashed, how they fed him a bunch of lies. And my hope is that Democrats will be able to connect what he's saying about this Alvin Bragg case to the supposition that Donald Trump lies to you at every single turn. Fox is doing some really cool new polling work. They have a new issues tracker, and they also have this deal breaker question, which I think is so awesome. Like, what are the deal breaker issues for you? Number one was abortion. I think Democrats need to get back to talking about preserving female reproductive rights, that's something that's always going to win for them. But on the issues tracker, Biden has a 15-point advantage on honesty and trustworthiness. And I don't think they're leaning into it enough.
So before you became kind of a household name, you were a consultant around messaging. So I want you to do sort of kind of armchair consulting. We're the Republican Party. What is our messaging around this issue moving forward?
I think that you've really got to split it up and you got to pick your best voices that are going to be out there kind of parroting what Donald Trump wants to hear. So it seems like JD Vance, Marco Rubio are taking the mantle for that. They're both high up in the VP search. I think JD Vance is probably ahead of Rubio in that, and let them, people who are respected as being intelligent folks talk about it. And the rest of the party really has got to get back to talking about the issues. I saw how Larry Hogan was totally maligned for saying something pretty normal, like just respect the jury decision. He didn't even say what he thought about Donald Trump, even though we all know what it is that he thinks. And people like Kevin McCarthy, who has found some courage since he has been out of office, was on Fox talking about it and said, what are we doing going after Larry Hogan? That might be our chance to actually win a Senate majority. And whatever Donald Trump wants to talk about, it doesn't change the fact that there is an election where people are going to turn up and they're going to vote on the economy, crime and policing, abortion for sure. And if the only message coming out of the Republican Party is Donald Trump is a victim, when everyone can see that that's not really what a victim looks like, it's not going to go well.
What now do Democrats? What do you think the messaging? Do you think they play up President Biden's positives as you reference, or do you think they go on offense and start calling this guy a felon? I mean, the risk is it makes President Biden look less presidential, less bipartisan, less statesmanlike. It lowers the contrast between him and Trump because we know what Trump will do. Do you go on offense or do you try and maintain a statesmanlike demeanor?
Well, I think this is where you can separate Biden from his surrogates. And he has some fantastic surrogates who need to be out there more. I mean, John Fetterman has become the darling, right, of the party. He went from vegetable to, can we get this guy to come to my rally? And Republicans saying to me, I had a very funny off air conversation with a colleague who's like, I like John Fetterman now. What is that? And I was like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have been so shitty about him. He's actually kind of always been that way. You just didn't ask him about Israel. So,
Yeah, well, but that isn't that he threads the needle, right?
oh,
He
totally.
he throws a bone to the Republicans by saying, "I'm unapologetically pro-Israel, but this guy's a crook."
Yeah. And he doesn't think about it that way. That's the thing about John Fetterman is he doesn't have the vibe of anyone who is calculating what they're saying. And you can say that, and look at his outfit, right? No one picked that out, right? No one said this is coordinated. And he just speaks from the heart. And I think that that's something that's really resonating with folks. And you see it with Gretchen Whitmer as well. Josh Shapiro, Wes Moore is becoming a superstar this way. So I think that those folks can be out there threading the needle. And Biden has dabbled in the convicted felon jargon a little, but in general, I want to see more of the interviews. Like he's on the cover of Time that came out this morning. I want to see more of that. Him talking about the policy issues, what he's actually done in the Middle East. He's pretty critical of Netanyahu, actually, which is something that I think will not only appease the left side of the party, but a lot of the people like me who are pretty moderate in the middle, want Israel to do everything that they possibly can to get the hostages back and to bring peace, but to recognize that Netanyahu is a bad actor in all of that. So I think Biden, stays a statesman, but he unleashes the beast underneath that and makes sure that every one of those gettable voters knows what the alternative is and that they also are aware of the fact that if they sit it out, if they were a Nikki Haley voter or a Chris Christie voter, that is another vote for Trump.
He brought up a key word, and something I've been thinking about a lot: surrogates. And I'm disappointed that he hasn't weaponized more surrogates. I don't see Mayor Pete out there. I don't see John Fetterman wasn't planned.
Right.
I don't
No,
think they've been
it's total
coordinating.
surprise.
And it strikes me that there are 50 or 100 incredible surrogates that could be out there. Governor Newsom is really good on his feet. I would argue that he might be a better candidate than an actual politician. But it strikes me, why have they not, put these people in, so to speak, put me in, coach? Why have they not weaponized them? And also, one thing I'm disappointed at is that typically the person that goes on the attack is the vice president. And why has that not? Is it because they don't see her as effective? Is it because she is in fact ineffective? And also, where's the weaponization in the surrogate strategy here?
Yeah, so we are still early in campaign mode. And I think that the fact that they moved up the debates puts them further on their heels, right? Like you've got to go faster if you've decided that you want to have a debate June 27th. So we've got to see that. Kamala Harris it's been tough, right? And we talked about the last time that you had me on. She has not panned out as the superstar that a lot of Democrats hoped that she would be. I was personally not a tremendous Kamala fan in the primary, and I think it said something that she dropped out before Iowa, right? She didn't even get the opportunity to have a vote cast for her. And the Democratic base was sending a signal that she wasn't what they thought she was or what they had hoped that she was going to be. So I think there's a little bit of anxiety about that. And I think that also she is, to give her credit, doing well talking to younger bases. She's doing a huge amount of college tours, for instance. And we know that the turnout in these college towns, especially in conservative states, you hear about a conservative state and then suddenly there was this boom turnout for a referendum on women's reproductive rights. And it's like, oh, is there a big college town in there? So she's doing that. And also, I think that she is the best representative of the administration, unsurprisingly, to talk about women's health. And she's been doing that really well. So that's really been her focus. But I think that she has to get in on this, especially with her law enforcement background. She was the top cop, right, in California. And I think, if we want to get away from defund the police, which I wish had never happened, and move more towards we're the party of law and order, and we can make that claim now, right? They don't respect any judicial decisions at this point. They think the Supreme Court is on tap for them. Mike Johnson out there saying like, I think they'll step in. I called my buddies over there, and they'll do something that she has a real role to play. The surrogate strategy, it'll be rolled out as the campaign gets going, but I would love to see it more. And I'm hugely enthusiastic about Democrats showing up, especially in conservative media, because that's where the persuadable voters are. They're not watching MSNBC, they're not watching CNN. So they're tuning into Fox. And when Mayor Pete comes on, I still can't call him Secretary Pete. It just feels unnatural. When he comes on, he does great.
Yeah, he does great.
So I'm with you on that.
Same with Governor Newsom, right? It's interesting that you said that,
he's
though.
So charming.
Yeah, he's very likable. He's very likable. I remember 25 years ago, I was in San Francisco, and I was thinking I filled out the paperwork to run for supervisor, and I brought my friend, and we met then, I think, Supervisor Newsom, and we talked to him for about 2 minutes, and then he walked away, and then me and my friend looked at each other, and I'm like, I have no chance. If that's the competition, there's just, my career is over before it started. You meet that guy, and you're like, I'm not even sure what he's saying. I just know I want him to be, I want to vote for him or give him money. What do you make of, you just said something very interesting, that you think there's more that there's more influenceable or more moderate or more swingable voters watching Fox. I agree that MSNBC, but you think that more moderates watch Fox than CNN?
Yeah, well, the Nielsen data actually bears it out. So we have more Democrats and more independents who are by nature the persuadables, right? Because they're not going with one way or the other. I tend to think a social issue usually pushes you into one bucket, and now it's abortion. But yeah, the numbers bear that out. And also, like, CNN's ratings, and I love a lot of the people at CNN, and I think there's a lot of really good commentary, but they just don't get many viewers technically. So the percentages of persuadables has to be even less. And obviously they're going through, a bit of an identity crisis. And I think they have some amazing people who are now anchoring big shows like the Caitlin Collinses of the world and Abby Phillip. But they're searching for their base. And Fox has a conservative base, but we also have this persuadable base. And they're the people most apt to reach out to me, right? It will say, I may lean towards Jesse Waters' perspective or Greg Gutfeld's perspective, these people on the five with me, but I really appreciate your fact-based commentary, or that you always come to represent the Democratic side in a reasonable way. And that's the key to all of this. Just be reasonable. Don't be unhinged. And right now the Republicans look unhinged.
So before we cut you loose here, just handicap or give us your best guess or prediction on what you think, going back to Trump, happens with sentencing.
So I'm not a lawyer, and it's a tough one. I've tried to ingest as much information about this as possible. I do come down on the side of that there will be a recommendation for jail time, but I was listening to Preet Bharara's podcast, and he had a really interesting suggestion for Alvin Bragg, which was to show the judge how this particular crime had been sentenced the last 5 years, for instance, to say, these are the sentences that have been given out before, and then to put it more in Judge Merchan's court, than to make the straight recommendation. But I don't expect any serving of time if he's sentenced to jail and he's elected. And then certainly it would be after the election. They're not going to stop him from running his campaign. But I think it's over 50% likelihood. And a lot of people who, work in the system and know the players in this really well think that that is the expectation, which is absolutely unbelievable. I thought, if anything, the Fulton County case was going to be the jail case that we would be hearing about, but we're not even going to see that this year, odds are.
Well, it feels as if Trump is daring the judge to sentence him to prison, and I found that is not typically a good strategy for convicted felons.
No, it's not. And I don't think that he's going to like the result of it. I mean, he's a famous germaphobe. Prison is not nice, even if you get the best treatment, even if you're at Danbury playing tennis, a couple times a day. So I think that he needs to be really careful about what he wishes for and what he thinks is going to become an electoral advantage. They clearly think that there's, some possibility that he's going to be like a civil rights leader in all of this. And we could spend hours discussing how offensive it is that he thinks that Black people are going to like him more now that this has happened to him. But, be careful what you wish for, because the other side of it isn't just like a night at home alone eating pizza, it's being in jail.
Jessica Tarlov is a co-host on The Five, Fox weeknight news program. She also offers political analysis across Fox Business Network, or FBM. Jessica is also the vice president of research and consumer insight for Bustle Digital Group. She joins us from her home in New York, where she is enjoying her maternity leave and has just welcomed a new 7-week-old girl. Congratulations on everything.
Yeah,
Jess.
thank you so much, and thanks for having me.